This morning's reading is from John chapter 4. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he."
All right. When I was in college, I had a friend named Eric. And Eric was a great guy, brilliant guy, much smarter than I was, got way better grades than I ever did. The thing about Eric, though, he was addicted to TV. He was addicted to particular movies. This was back way before you could stream Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and all that stuff. You had to go to the local Blockbuster. And Eric, it seemed like on a daily basis, was going to Blockbuster, renting new movies, and coming back to the dorm room and watching these movies. Right? He'd come back from classes, and there would be Eric in the room watching Die Hard, or whatever it would be. I don't know when this guy studied. He must have just been naturally brilliant. Like I said, got way better grades than I did, but always seemed like he was watching a movie. We come in on a Friday night, say, hey, Eric, come on, we're going to go into the city. We're going to get something to eat, walk around, do something fun. Eric said, I'm going to stay back. I'm going to watch a movie and just, This is what he did. He literally all the time he was watching movies. And the thing about Eric that was interesting is that growing up, there was no TV in this house. His parents never watched TV, never let their kids watch TV, or I should say it was very controlled whenever they would watch a movie. Maybe on one rare occasion, if a movie that was good and wholesome was coming out, they would go to the movie theater and watch the movie. Other than that, Eric grew up hardly ever watching TV. So it's almost like, or this is what it seemed to the rest of us, that when he got to college and he was out from that control system and he got a taste of just on-demand movies that he could just go and rent and watch whatever it's like this something, like the dam burst, and out came this intense hunger and desire for TV and movies, and he never left it. I learned a little bit about parenting, I think, from Eric, that I have to be careful that the very things that I may try to, control and keep away, or might be anyway. But the other thing, I was thinking about that this week. I think something similar to that happened, or it maybe even continues to happen in our broader culture in relation to the business of spirituality, right? In a few generations past, it seemed like there was this dam, holding back spirituality, right? It was, I don't know, the influence of the intellectual elites or us enlightened Western thinkers, right? That spirituality was just this small compartment of life that maybe we indulge from time to time, but fundamentally we are biomechanical creatures. We are creatures of nature and nurture, creatures that are, chemical reactions responding to stimuli and evolving and making decisions, all this sort of thing. And that if you, indulge in spirituality or religion, that this was just something that you did on the side or as a personal compartment unique to you and to who you are. And then it seemed like, again, maybe going back a generation or two, something happened and there was this break in the dam and people started to taste of something deeper within themselves, and they started to question that, and then all of a sudden it seemed like the dam just burst, and everybody went in search of this deeper, spiritual, transcendent life and experience. Right? In my generation, it might have been, New Age spirituality and mysticism was all the rage. Maybe today it's more comes in this form, actually, of a very ancient form of spirituality, this ancient Gnosticism that says the way that you tap into spirituality is that you dig deep and you find that very unique inner self. And you, pursue these tactics to bring that self out and let it flourish, and you shake off whatever shackles or constructs have held that self down. And as you do that, boy, you will experience this deep richness of spirituality. You just go on to Amazon and you just type in spirituality and you click the tab for bestsellers, right? And you'll find anything and everything in terms of philosophies of spirituality or tactics of spirituality, how you pursue and enjoy it or whatever. It's like there's this hunger for it, but it's like the dam is burst and it's just this raging flow of this desire for spiritual experience and life. It's uncontrolled, it's unguided. And on the one hand, so the Bible speaks to this. The Bible certainly would say, well, that's to be expected. It's to be understood. The Bible would say that we are spiritual creatures. We are embodied spirits. That's how God made us. He fashioned us out of the dust, and then he breathed life into us such that we became living spirits. And the Bible would say that, and there is this creator who is loving, and who desires to know you and be known by you, and who has made us to live in fellowship with him. Okay, so the Bible says, this is all very natural. You can't just suppress this, who you are. It's going to come out. And, okay, so all to say that we're getting into this section in the book of John where I feel like Jesus is going to start to talk about more this business of spirituality. He's going to start talking about stuff that wells up inside of you and overflows, and all this is this sort of analogies for spiritual life and spiritual depth. In other words, we've talked about how Jesus has said, look, I've come that my people may have life and have it to the full. And we're getting into this part in John where he's going to start to talk about the spiritual nature of this life and this rich life that wells up inside of us. And so we're going to start to explore that. Today's sort of introductory a little bit as he's poking at this. And part of the thing, remember the context where we're at here. If you were an ancient Israelite or ancient Jewish person, they believed wholeheartedly in rich spirituality, and they had their answers for how you go about enjoying and feasting on that spirituality. And it would come down to two words, essentially, temple and Torah. All right? Temple was the place where heaven and earth overlapped, where the divine, transcendent creator made his presence felt, right? And so if spirituality is this having this connection with God and with your maker, well, then the temple was the place where you go to be near to the presence of God and to experience that presence in some way, shape, or form. And then the other one was Torah, or the law that God gave to his people, right? Because an Israelite, a Jewish person, would understand that the law was not just these random commands that God gave to his people, but rather it was an expression of who he was. It's him saying, this is who I am, so I'm calling you to be like me, right? And so an Israelite, a Jewish person, understood that to live in the image of God, or to live as God's covenant people in relationship with him, was to live out the law. Okay, and I say that because just remember where we are here in the book of John. In the previous two chapters, it's like Jesus has started to dismantle those two very things, right? Remember in chapter 2, Jesus goes into the temple, and he goes right to, where the guys were selling the livestock and the animals that people needed to make sacrifice, and he starts flipping over the tables, and when the people come and they question him about it, he says, well, destroy this temple, and I will rebuild it in 3 days, talking about himself. Interesting. And then you come into the very next chapter, the very next episode is Nicodemus, a Pharisee, coming and talking to Jesus about the kingdom. And remember the Pharisees, these were the experts in the law, right? These were the guys who were convinced that as we are more faithful to the law, God will look at us, be pleased, have mercy, and come restore the kingdom to us. So Nicodemus, more than anybody, would have been one of the premier law lovers, law keepers. And Jesus says, to you, I tell you, Nicodemus, no, there's something missing. And unless you're totally reborn, even all this faithful law keeping, you won't see the kingdom. And so you can imagine an ancient Israelite would be starting to say, okay, so Jesus, what in the world are you all about? Or what in the world is this spirituality, right? You're tearing down temple, you're tearing down law. Okay, so how is it that one enjoys this richness, this depth, this spiritual life? And I believe that this is Jesus starting to unpack this. And so again, today is just sort of an introduction. And the way we're going to do that is just sort of walk through this conversation that Jesus has with this Samaritan woman at the well of Jacob. And the first thing I actually want to do is I want you to just put yourself there and first of all see just how strange this whole conversation is from the get-go. My parents get George and Jeffrey, you remember those Highlight magazines? And you guys get those highlights for your kids. You remember when you would go to the dentist office as a kid, they would have the Highlights magazine, and as you're there shaking because you know that the dentist is going to do on your teeth, you're trying to look at these. That was my experience anyway. But sometimes on the back of or somewhere in the Highlights magazine, the page I always liked was you would go to it and it would be this cartoon drawing, and it would essentially say, what's wrong with this picture? And you would find all the things that are wrong with this picture. The guy's talking on the phone, and it's a telephone, and it's a banana or whatever. I feel like in a similar way, what we need to start this morning is to look at this picture and say, what is wrong with this picture? Because there's a whole lot that, at least for an ancient Israelite or ancient Jewish person, is wrong with this picture. Okay? And let's talk about it. Okay, so let's set the scene here. He's departing Jerusalem, heading back up to the Galilee. Jerusalem is in the southern part of Israel, Galilee up in the north. Jesus has found out, Pharisees are finding out he's baptizing a lot of people, more so than John. You know, he's getting a little nervous about that. Maybe the tension is rising. Jesus says, okay, for now it's time to get out of Dodge. So they're going to go up to the Galilee. And the quickest way, most natural way to go from Jerusalem up into Galilee would be to go through Samaria, or what today is the West Bank. Okay, but what was the more common way of going, especially if you were an Israelite, if you were a Jewish person, is you would go around Samaria. You would probably go down to Jericho to the east, and then you would go to the Jordan River or the Jordan Valley, and you would go up the Jordan Valley to, the head in the Sea of Galilee. And the reason is because, well, you got it sort of in the text there, the Jews, they didn't associate with the Samaritans. There was a lot of historical bad blood between the Jews and the Samaritans, going all the way back to, a couple hundred years to the exile, when the Israelites were ransacked by the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and they were carried off into exile, or at least a significant number of them were carried off into exile. And part of what these conquering nations would do to totally dismantle a society, not only would they carry off the people into exile, but they would start to import and resettle their own people into the land, who would remarry with the survivors or whoever was left in the land. And that was essentially how you would totally destroy or do away with a whole culture and a civilization. So 70 years after the exile, when the exiles come back, and when they come back with all of their good intentions to restore the integrity and the purity of covenant Israel, well, we got a problem here. We have all these mixed blood, half-breeds, Samaritans, right? These former Israelites who intermarried with the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and maybe in intermarrying with them, brought in with them some of their religious practices and some of their gods. And so there was this tension that started brewing there. You could go on and on. Go talk to John Schmidt. Apparently he wrote a paper on the Samaritans not too long ago. But the Samaritans, another thing about them is that they rejected Jerusalem. They didn't like Jerusalem and this whole David-centric kingdom, right? They felt like, no, the true epicenter was in Samaria and Shechem and Mount Gerizim. So they built their own temple on Mount Gerizim. And they didn't listen to I don't want to get into too much of the history, other than to say, the Jews weren't too fond of that either. And actually, I think it was 160 BC, they went in and destroyed that temple. And they destroyed what was built on Mount Gerizim. And so forever there was this really bad blood. You didn't go there, you didn't associate with them. So here it is. The first thing that's strange is that Jesus goes through Samaria, and he's sitting at a well, and he has a conversation with a Samaritan person. Not just a Samaritan person, but a Samaritan woman, right? No self-respecting religious leader would ever be alone with a woman in that day. And if for some odd reason you found yourself alone with a woman, you certainly wouldn't strike up a conversation with her. And if for some reason she starts talking to you and you're trying to ignore you, you definitely wouldn't ask her for something or share a vessel, a cup or whatever she's got there in order to take a drink of water. You just didn't do that. No self-respecting religious figure, leader, rabbi would have done that. And then maybe the third strike, or the third thing that's odd in this, is that this is a woman, a Samaritan woman, whose life is a mess, right? We find out a little bit later on, she's had 500 husbands, and the husband that she's living with now is not genuinely her husband. And here's the thing, right? We don't know what's going on behind that. We don't know if she was the main result of that, or if she was the result of others sinning against her. We know one thing for sure, that women back in that day, they had no right or opportunity to ever file for divorce. So she was never the initiator of any of these divorces. She might have played a part in it, we don't know. So we don't know what's all going on there. The text isn't too concerned to tell us. But what we do get a pretty clear sense of is that this woman's life is a mess. Partly because of that, but you also get a little clue in the text where we're told that it's the 6th hour. The 6th hour would have been high noon. Exactly the time when if you live in the desert, you would not be going to a well to draw water and to carry these buckets of water back to where you were going. If you were going to go to the well, you did that in the morning when it was cooler, when the heat hadn't kicked in. And the thing about these wells, they were kind of like the place where women would gather and they would talk and do relationships or whatever. Right? Think about your Old Testament. Where are all the guys going to find a wife? They're going to the wells because that's where the women apparently hung out. Right? Whether it's Isaac or Moses finding Zipporah, right? This is just where women hung out and did the things. I don't know, like Amy and Karen. Where's Karen? Amy and Karen, they go thrift shopping on Friday morning because apparently it's half off at the thrift store. I have no idea what they go to the thrift. Why do you even go to the thrift store? I have no idea. But they go there. I don't know what they do there, but that's where they go and they talk and relate and do all this. This is where they would go. Okay, so probably the indication that this woman is going at the 6th hour at high noon is probably because she's not interested in dealing with the scorn or the gossip or the looks of these, or maybe she's not even welcome. Maybe that's been made abundantly clear to her. In other words, do you see the picture here? From a Jewish perspective, this would be an outcast of outcasts of outcasts, right? It's a woman, a Samaritan woman, whose life is a mess and who is outcast probably from her own culture and community. And Jesus goes and has a conversation with her. And maybe even more than that, our text says that as they were going to Galilee, he had to go through Samaria. And I don't think he was in a hurry. And somebody's birthday party was about to go down in Galilee, so I got to get there before Thursday. And so we don't have time to go around. Let's just go out through Samaria. Actually, the indication from the text was that he was compelled, or that he was urged, or maybe that he was spirit-led to go through Samaria, to have this appointment with this woman, to engage her. Just remember that. Tuck that away. See that. And so then they start to have a conversation. She comes, and I love this. Jesus comes to her in humility. He's wearied from his trip. This Jesus, the Creator God in flesh, is wearied, and he comes to her in humility and asks her for something. Right? This is not Jesus coming immediately, judging her or standing up, as a good self-respecting Jew and said, well, I shouldn't be talking to you, but I am kind of thirsty. He asks her in humility, can I have a drink? And the woman says, what is this? That you, a Jew, ask me for a drink, right? She's kind of blown away by this whole conversation. And then Jesus says this. He says, look, if you understood the gift of God, so you can tell this is much more than just getting a drink. He's interested in this woman and having a conversation with her. He says, look, you know that if you understood the gift of God and who it is who's here before you asking for a drink, you would be asking me for a drink. Last night, Callie is in a choir at the school with Julia and Gabe, and they had this opportunity to sing the national anthem at the Phillies game. So we got to go to the Phillies game last night. This is why I might be in a bad mood this morning, but whatever. And when we park in a neighborhood just up the street, up Broad Street a little bit, and then we come in, through Patterson Avenue? I don't know, but we come in through the gate where there's the big Jumbotron there, and that's one of the main entrances. And man, the Phillies, they are sinister in the way they market things and sell stuff. Right inside that gate, just to the right of that gate, is Bull's Barbecue. Right? So even before you get in the gate, you can smell pork fat rendering over hickory smoke. And it is, and then you walk in and you can see it, and you can see the guy flipping the ribs like this, and you can hear the sound and the sizzles, right? And it's it cultivates this longing, like, I want that. It's almost like that, I need to have that. And for whatever reason, maybe it's just because that's the experience closest to my mind. Like, that's the sort of sense that I have here. Jesus saying, look, if you understood this gift that is being offered, and if you understood who it is here that's offering to this, it would stir up this desire, this yearning, such that you would ask me for that gift. And that's the other thing about it. Thankfully, for my sake and for the sake of my bank account, the Phillies, they charge an astronomical amount for a thing of ribs, and such that if I was eating that ribs, I would feel bad about the amount of money that I spent for it, so I can easily walk past it. But if those were free, and if the guy there stood out and he just started handing these ribs out, it didn't matter if my arteries were 99.9% clogged and I was having a hard time walking up the stairs. There's nothing, I would not have the strength to say no to that and not to just devour those ribs. Right? And so that's the other sense where this Jesus is saying to this woman, if you understood the gift that is being offered to you, this free gift that God of his own love is extending to you, if you understood, well, you would desire it, you would crave it, you would yearn for it, you would ask me for it. Which is just a very simple point, where if you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, maybe you're curious about what all the buzz is about this Jesus guy, or you're just whatever, and you find not too interested in trusting your life to him or coming to him, it could be just because simply you don't know him, and you haven't learned of him, and you haven't sat under his word, and you haven't heard and seen his heart and who he is, or you haven't investigated what he comes to offer. I think that's part of the challenge. If you only knew, oh man, you would crave that, and you would long for that. I mean, even if you are a follower of Christ, and if you're like me, where you have these seasons where, I don't know, your walk with Christ is, it drops down the priority list, and there's other things you tend to, and then maybe you just work Jesus in if you have an opportunity to. The reason for that is because, at least for me, because I forget the blessings that come through walking and relating and yearning and drawing near to and depending on Christ. And it's like as soon as you get that first, that taste of it again, it's like you remember, oh yes, this is right, this is good, this is where my life ought to be centered. So he says, if you only knew, you would ask me. And the woman says to her, well, how is it that you don't even have a bucket with which to draw this water from? How is it that are you greater than Jacob, who dug this well for us and provides this living water? Jesus is a master conversationalist, as we've already seen, right? In that he gives just enough that they come back with more questions and they're more curious and they don't fully understand. He's talking about heavenly things, so they keep asking this question, like, are you greater than Jacob, who built this well for us of living water? And Jesus tells them, look, the water that I give to you, you're going to drink that water and you're going to thirst again. But the water that I give to you will be deeply satisfying, and you will never thirst again, and it will well up inside of you to eternal life. If you go on Amazon and you look for spiritual books and you type in, bestsellers or whatever, again, you're going to find anything and everything, a whole myriad of books and techniques and tactics that you can find. I mean, thousands, maybe millions of books at your disposal. And part of that, I think, is because spirituality is very customizable in our day and age. Right? We find the spirituality that we think will be best suited for us, and we go after that, and we try to read those books. But I think the other reason is because, well, as you read one book and you develop one tactic, you go after that, and you find, okay, well, there is something good and satisfying about that, but then that just fades, and that dies away, and you're left with that thirst. And so someone else comes along and writes a book, and these books just keep coming out over and over and over, and they keep making all sorts of money on these books because the silver bullet that fully satisfies, like we haven't got there yet. Except Jesus is saying, look, what I'm offering to you, you'll never thirst again. And so the woman, different from Nicodemus, where Nicodemus has to keep asking questions until he can get this figured out in his head. Like this woman is very clear. She says, well, give me that water. that I may drink and not have to come here and be thirsty again. And then, okay, so here goes Jesus, now not just a masterful conversationalist, but a strange one. Because on the one hand, you feel like you would say, okay, Jesus, there it is, right? You have presented this in such a way that you have piqued her curiosity. She's asking the question, and she's now asking you the very thing that you said she would do if she understood. She's asking you for this water. Great, conversation solved. Except, now Jesus is going to go right to the gaping wound, right to that mess, right to the brokenness, and says, well, go get your husband and come back. I'll give you this water. You would expect here that this woman then would say, oh, okay, I get it. You're just like everybody else, Seem to show some interest, and then you go right for the jugular. Yeah, thanks. Okay, let me just get my water and on my way. It's almost like this tremendous act of courage and curiosity that she stays. And she says, I have no husband. Jesus says, yeah, I know you have no husband. You actually had 5, and the guy that you're living with right now, it's not your husband either. Which I think is this, important reminder that you're going to see throughout the book, and we're going to have to keep coming back around to, that this business of spirituality, it's not just about adding God or some transcendent experience with the divine or whatever into my life. But it's also this business of dealing with, bringing to the surface, removing, healing the brokenness and the ugliness and the messiness and the sinfulness that was keeping us from the life that God would have for us, that was keeping us from rich communion with our Creator and keeping us from enjoying the life that He intended. In other words, it's about getting in there and removing all that was lost when sin and darkness entered that picture. Okay, that's an important point here. And so the woman then, she responds, I don't know if she's changing, averting the conversation or whatever, or just genuinely she says, okay, look, I see that you're a prophet. Clearly you are someone sent from God. And then she asks this question, well, so then tell me, our forefathers, our people, we believe that here on Mount Gerizim is where you come to encounter the presence of the living God and you come to worship Him. You all believe it's down in Jerusalem. What's right? What's the deal? And then here's where you get this central part of what Jesus says. He says, look, I tell you, an hour is coming. So, by the way, remember what Jesus is referring to. Anytime he says, there is an hour that is yet to come. There's an hour coming when you're neither going to worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem, but you're going to worship in spirit and truth. For God is seeking genuine worshipers. And God is spirit. And He longs and He's seeking those who will worship Him in spirit and truth. Very important line, and it's a line that I think often gets misused. Right? If you're coming from the broader, secular view of spirituality, you would say, yeah, it's exactly right. Or I would say this, that what the tendency is that we radically personalize that statement, or we make that radically subjective. In other words, if I'm in the secular culture, I'm going to say, yes, right, exactly. I have to dig down. I have to find my truth. And I have to let that come out. And my true spirit, who I am, freely, unconstrained, unrestricted by this, that, and the other, right? I need to worship God freely and authentically out of my own truth. I'm trying to use as many cultural buzzwords as I can. Or maybe from a Christianized perspective, yeah, I worship God genuinely out of my heart, and I don't need necessarily church to do that. Right? I can worship God in the car. I can worship God on a hike, as long as it's coming authentically from deep within me and from my spirit. And I'm worshiping out of my spirit. I don't need the church for that. I don't need, all this tradition and structure, or I don't need the messiness of relationships with God's people to do that. I can worship genuinely wherever I am, however I am, as long as it's coming authentically and truthfully from my spirit. And the thing is, there might be some measure of truth to that. That's for a topic for another conversation. the bigger point for this point, I don't think that's at all what he's saying here. Or in other words, I wouldn't use this passage to defend that line of reasoning, right? Anytime in the book of John where Jesus starts to talk about Spirit, he's talking about the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the one who is going to come into the world and convict the world and speak of Christ and cause stuff to well up inside of you. And anytime Jesus is talking about truth, who's he usually talking about? He's usually talking about himself, right? John 14:6, I am the way, I am the truth and the life. Or John 18, when he's standing in front of the Roman governor, Pilate, and he says to him, look, I have come to bear witness to the truth, and all those who walk in the truth, listen to me. And then you get Pilate's question that echoes through the ages. What is truth anyway, right? In other words, this business of spirituality and spiritual depth and vitality in life, it's not just digging in deep into my own spirit and living out my authentic truth. No, it's about seeing, desiring, and yielding to the truth in Christ as he bears witness to it. And it's about receiving and yielding to and living out the work of his Spirit in us. That's important, but you got to tuck that away because that's just going to be a major theme throughout the rest of this book. So then lastly, the woman says to him, well, I know the Messiah is coming, and when the Messiah comes, he's going to lead us in all truth, and he's going to tell us everything that we need to know. And Jesus closes the section with the first of his I am statements from the book. He says, I am he. I am that Messiah. I am that one who comes in the most perfect way, bearing truth to who God is and what he's all about. I am God in the flesh. I am that Messiah, the Mashiach. I am that anointed one who is going to be king over my people and reestablish the kingdom and lead my people as king into the life that God always intended for them. I am the Messiah who is going to bring in the life of the future, the life that we are all looking forward to, that is good and right and just. I am the one who, even in the here and now, is starting to bring this into the world. I am the true living temple, the place where you come to commune and to fellowship and to enjoy the presence of the living God. And then, well, this is where we'll pick it up next week. Something clicks, and you can just sort of see that something is welling up inside this woman because now she's so full of joy or curiosity or whatever that she goes running through the town and saying, hey, you've got to come meet this guy who knows me better than anybody that's ever known me and is offering this life. And so maybe just this morning, the very simple point, well, it's twofold. And again, these are very just basic introductory things here, but when it comes to this business of spirituality, like first and foremost, you need to see what Jesus has been saying all along. He's going to say all throughout the book of John. It all comes to a head with me, right? You want to enjoy, find, live out spiritual life, which is rich and deep and satisfying, right? It comes through a life that's centered on me. As I was thinking about the practical implications of this text, like the phrase that kept coming to mind was that invitation that Jesus gives to Andrew and John all the way back in the beginning of the book. He asks them a question, what is it you're seeking? And then, he says, come and see, right? And that's sort of like the main challenge, right? Understand that spirituality is all rooted and centered upon this person of Jesus Christ. And so come and see. Come and see who he is, what he's all about, what is his heart. And my guess is that as you understand who it is who is offering this gift, you will desire it and you will long for it. And then the other thing, again, foundational, but something that we so often just either miss or move past, that all of this is gift. And all of this is God's work, and it's God's initiative, right? That just oozes off the pages of this whole story. Right? It's Jesus who had to go through Samaria. It's not like this woman was seeking anybody out. Like Jesus had to go to have this conversation with this woman. It's this Jesus who comes to her. God in the flesh comes to her in humility and engages her softly and says, "Can I have a drink?" Right? It's this Jesus who said, if you understand the gift that I'm offering, man, you would long for it. Right? It's this Jesus who is willing to engage with her and who cares enough about her to know her and begins to poke and prod in her life. Or it's this Jesus who says God the Father is seeking. Maybe there's the main point. Like, it's not that we all are seeking God. We're all floundering around in the darkness. But God is seeking people who will worship him. And it's God who is sending his Son to condescend from heaven to reveal truth. And it's God who is sending the Spirit to cause this life to well up inside of us. In other words, it's God's work, it's God's business. It's ours to believe, it's ours to receive, and by so doing, become dearly loved sons and daughters with all the rights and privileges entitled therein. And what I would challenge you is that it's just so countercultural. That might seem like a simple point, but it's so countercultural, right? Because secular spirituality is all about digging deep, understanding who you are, and then finding techniques and tactics that will help that to come out and to flourish. I think it would be an interesting, conversation, discussion at the small groups that meet after church, or maybe around the lunch table when you're talking. Yeah, what exactly is the difference, and how does that play out? Just seeing and savoring Christ and yielding to him, longing to him, and letting him do his work versus this intense pursuit of spirituality and learning who I am and letting that come out and investing all these techniques and tactics or whatever. Just notice the difference and notice how we're tempted either way. Or maybe here's the other way we resist it, and I'm going to close it with this. We can resist this gift and this work of God by essentially saying, well, okay, I see it, I long for it, I want it, can I have it? But hey, look, there's this area in my heart and this area in my life. Yeah, don't touch that, please. just let that go. I got that under control. I'm working on that, but don't you go there. Don't you go near these gaping wounds or these holes or these sinful addictions or whatever it is. I got that. I'll work on those things. And Jesus is saying, look, I'm not here to just be a painkiller. I'm here to be a surgeon who goes to work at these things that are robbing you of the life that my Father has for you. It's like when your kid comes in, and he's screaming and crying. You say, what's wrong? What's wrong? I got a splinter. And you say, oh, okay, no problem. You go grab the tweezers, you grab the hand. Like, I got this. No. And he said, no, don't touch it, don't touch it. And you say, no, look, I've done this a million times. I had it. I'm going to pull the thing right out. No problem. No, you can't touch this. This would go on in our family on occasion. And so me being the brilliant father that I would say, they would say, well, don't touch it. It'll come out on its own, or I'll deal with it. And I'm going to say, no, it won't. Actually, it's going to stay in there. It's going to get inflamed. Every time you brush on it, it's going to send shots of pain. Eventually, it's going to be infected. We're going to have to cut your finger off. Sussex Parenting 101. Yeah, don't follow my lead. Right? And in that same way, we want Jesus, but we often want him on our own terms. And Jesus is saying, no. You receive the gift on my terms. And part of that is you let me come in there and you let me be the surgeon. And the thing is, I've walked these roads. This is Jesus saying this. I know this. I've been tried. I've been tested. I've been facing situations that caused me to sweat drops of blood and cry out that Father would let this cup pass. Right? I know what it is to feel the excruciating pains of thorns wrenched into the brow, or nails in the hand, or spears in the side, or even more than that, I know the agonizing pain that you probably know of abandonment. I know what it is to be abandoned by my brothers and sisters, my countrymen, as they cry out, crucify him. And I know what it is to be abandoned by my closest friends who got scared and ran away in my hour of darkest need. I know even what it means to be abandoned by my Heavenly Father as the weight of all the world's sin was placed on me. So I know. But I've conquered that. And that's why I can be the good and faithful surgeon to pull that out of you. And that's why I'm also the gentle and the gracious and the compassionate surgeon who's going to do it in just the way that you need it to be done. And so again, the message this morning, do you see that? Does it stir that longing within you? Or maybe the simple message is that The depth of spirituality is this seeing Jesus, savoring him, longing for him in such a way that we put down all these silly man-made attempts at spiritual life and vitality, and instead we look to him, we yield to him, we listen to him, and we open ourselves to him. Say, come do the work. Do you see that? Do you long for that? Do you yield yourself to him and receive that gift? Or for whatever reason, because you're too caught up in secular tactics, or because of your pride, or because of your fear, or whatever, do you resist that? Hear the invitation of Jesus. Come and see, and trust your life to me, and receive all the rights and privileges of dearly loved sons and daughters. May God lead us in that, for our joy and for his honor and glory, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.